Well, really, geez, since 2019.
Wow.
In fact, we can go back and we've talked about in 2017, the banks were net sellers of gold. And in 2017, we first saw a drive by many of the European central banks, in particular, the German Bundesbank, started the repatriation frenzy of repatriating their gold from the Bank of England and the New York Fed, followed by the Bank of Austria, the Dutch National Bank, the Bank of Hungary, the Bank of Poland, the Bank of Turkey. All of these countries said the same thing: give us back our gold. We want it. And it had been held by the Bank of England and the New York Fed for many, many years for many, many reasons. But that begun not only the repatriation, but the accumulation in 2018, 2019, 2020. But what we found in 2019, which allowed these central banks, I believe they were clued in, they front ran. The Bank of International Settlements reclassified gold as the world's only tier one asset next to US
Yeah.
dollars, the only other tier one asset. It's as good as cash, in other words. So the
Mm.
central banks have been the main accumulators of gold for quite some time. Now, what you're talking about is a little bit different. You're talking about the article probably that was in Bloomberg or in Reuters the other day that talked about central banks bought a record 399 tons of gold worth around $20 billion dollars in the third quarter of 2022. That was about 350% higher than Q3 2021 and almost double the previous record of 241 tons in 2018 in quarter three. It also marks the eighth consecutive quarter of net purchases and lifts the year-to-date total to 673 tons by the world's central banks. That is higher than any full year since 1967. So we're not even done with the year yet. You still have a couple months left, and we're already higher than any full year since 1967. What I found very interesting about that article is what really wasn't said.
Mm.
And Bloomberg talked about there being the buyers of all this gold being mystery whales. And
Yes.
they postulated, right, that the mystery buyers were either China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, or India. Now, wait a second. Where have we heard that before? Oh, yeah. When we first talked, what did we talk about? The BRICS nations:
Yes.
Brazil, Russia, China, India. Didn't we say that Saudi Arabia has already last week, 2 weeks ago, they submitted that they are joining BRICS? That was announced by the Royal Crown Prince and by the President of South Africa. They are joining BRICS.
Mm.
So these countries, all of these BRICS countries, that this newly strengthening BRICS alliance, the same ones that, what did they say a couple weeks ago? Oh yeah, we are going to develop a global reserve currency to challenge the dollar, backed by commodities. What is gold? The only other tier one reserve asset. Oh yeah. So it becomes very interesting when you see what's happening. But there was an article that I read after the fact. And I'm glad you asked me this question, because bet you didn't think I'd be this prepared to answer it.
You're
The
always
guy's name, well, and it's important because the guy's name is Ronan Manley, and he wrote a really interesting article about this. And we call him Ronan the Destroyer, some of my buddies who are in this industry, because he is an amazing, how can I put it? He is an investigative journalist, basically, on the gold side of things. And what he talks about is really quite interesting. And he says that the World Gold Council, who came out and told us that 399 tons were purchased,
yes.
said that 119 of those 399 tons were reported purchases. Okay.
Mm.
What does that mean about the other 280 tons? If 119 were reported of 399, well, what are the other 280? Oh, they're unreported purchases. Well, what the hell does that mean? Now, the article goes on to say that the reported 400-ton purchase is a combination of steady reported purchases by several central banks like Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been saying for weeks now that Turkey has bought more gold for the first half of 2022 than any country on the planet. They also said they're joining BRICS. BRICS is the country, or the group of countries, that is going to issue the world reserve currency pegged to commodities. Very, very interesting. But the point of it is that the unreported buying, they say, is not uncommon. It's not all official institutions publicly report their sales. The example that I would give would be China or Saudi Arabia. China hasn't updated their gold holdings for a long time. They do very, very rarely, but they are the biggest importers and producers of gold in the world. Saudi Arabia, who has been gobbling up gold, hasn't updated their official holdings since 2010. Or more ominously, perhaps these mystery whales, whoever they are, know something that the Western nations prefer not to consider about the New World Order. I think that what we are seeing is very disconcerting. Now, one of the things that I've talked about, Kia, that I haven't really talked to you about is in 2020, 2021, 2022, this group of reportables on the Commitment of Traders report. What is that? That probably means a whole lot of nothing to your listeners. The Commitment of Traders report is a report published by the COMEX, which is the U.S. commodity exchange, where all the prices globally are set. And they report the positioning of the largest traders in the world, or on the exchange rather. And normally they have just two groups of reportables: the commercials, which would be JP, Citi, Goldman, et cetera, Bank of America, and the specs, which are the hedge funds. And they battle against one another. If the commercials go long, the specs or hedge funds go short, and vice versa. And for most of my career, no one ever took possession of metal off the COMEX. Never. Or the London Metals Exchange. They were platforms to use for trading. Very rarely would anyone take delivery, maybe 1%. Well, that's not happening right now. And in 2020, I talked about the rise of this group called the Others, who we don't know who they are. They are believed to be sovereign wealth funds and family offices. That's who they're thought to be. Are they the ones that are taking all of this metal? Is it the most influential, well-funded, well-informed private traders? Because let me explain something to you. When we talk about supply, at the very top level of supply is the London Metals Exchange and the COMEX. This is where all the bars are stored, right? The LBMA, the London Bullion Market Association, their silver vault levels are contracting at the sharpest level in history. In fact, the total amount of silver in the LBMA vaults right now is down to 300 million ounces. Well, in September, or in August, India took possession of 46 million ounces. And in July, the withdrawals on the LBMA vault was 46,500,000 ounces. If it continues like this, you're talking mid-2023, all the deliverable silver would be depleted off the London Metals Exchange. And how about the COMEX, where the registered stockpile of silver right now is the lowest that it's ever been since they started keeping inventories? It's fallen by 70% in the last 18 months, meaning someone is draining the COMEX and the LBMA of gold and of silver. And in terms of silver, there's only enough silver backing the registered category to settle about 7,100 COMEX silver contracts. We're this close to the whole system really breaking apart. And so when you talk about who's buying all this gold and silver, well, it ain't the U.S., and it's either all of these countries that are rallying against the U.S. in the BRICS nations, or it is the very, very, very smart, well-funded, well-informed private traders who not only are purchasing it, but more relevant, they are withdrawing it from the ecosystem. Well, why would you do that? Because you're scared that the ecosystem is polluted. It's like being in a fishbowl and you drop 4 drops of poison into it. Fish are going to try to get out as fast as they can. The ones that don't get out are going to die. And that's kind of the analogy that I would make here. The smart fish who can jump out of the bowl, well, they're jumping. And they're jumping with as much of the clean water or the bars as they can take before the whole system becomes contaminated. It's very, very, very strikingly obvious it's something unusual in terms of accumulation and delivery and removal of counterparty risk is happening, where you see drawdowns on the epicenters of supply, both the London Metals Exchange and the COMEX, falling off a cliff at the fastest level it's ever been and to the lowest levels they've ever been, where you're just a few months away from blowing up the entire supply.